haiku, the shortest form of poetry in the world, going back over 1,200 years. It reflects the seasons and the emotions within. Photographs capture that one single moment. The two work together to create a new form of visual literature called Photo Haiku. Kurobane is located 130 kilometers north of Tokyo, in the mountains of Tochigi Prefecture. It is the place where Basho stayed longest during his journey to the far north, which he wrote about in Okuno Hosomichi.
Kurobane is where Basho truly committed to his long journey.
The road ahead was a difficult and dangerous one, where he would have to climb over mountains, through treacherous and unexplored paths. It was a road on which Basho could very well face death. In order to prepare his mind and soul, Basho visited many temples, one of which was Unganji, where he wrote the following haiku. It is here in Kurobane that Basho rested for a time. He stayed at Johoji's house, who was one of his beloved apprentices. The house today is a replica of the original. The atmosphere is as it was when Basho stayed.
This is where Basho stayed amongst his apprentices, who all gathered around to learn and to spend time with him. Our guest today is Dr. Barbara Morrison, who is currently an associate professor at Utsunomiya University. She studied under Donald Keene at Columbia University and has been studying Japanese literature for over 30 years. Do you also write haiku?
Yes, I have, and that's why I understand how difficult it is.
In Japanese?
In English, yes.
What do you find attractive about haiku?
I think it's the things as they are. It's a spiritual depth of being fully present in the moment and of opening. There's a kind of opening that happens in your heart, and that moment when you do forget yourself and you write to tell about it. You know, the haiku is a kind of it's a memory, but it's that moment when you were so enraptured, or so it's an epiphany, but it's a moment when you merge and you understand and become your human nature. You know, it's and I think in the West, I think we should stop there because I'm about to go off on another tangent.
The three-line format, Fusokufuri, where the haiku is not just a description of the photo, and seasonality are our three guidelines. Our haiku masters will now discuss and select the Haiku Master of the Month from all of the submissions we received from around the world.
Let's look at our first photo haiku.
The end of the pier. Two old men talk of yesteryear. Every day.
What you see is a boat, an old rusty boat. From the three-line haiku, you can imagine the two old men having a casual conversation, telling stories about their pasts.
Looking at the picture, and I'm thinking how you can see the chipped paint and the old antiquity, really, of the boat. And I think that that image goes very nicely with two old men, because when you imagine the two old men perhaps puttering around the boat or not being able to leave the boat because this was their halcyon days were in this boat. And so the picture gives a very nice support to imagining the two old men, I think.
You really do not see any reference to a particular season in the photo or the haiku, but let's take a closer look.
What do you think, the two old men, could this be the winter of their existence?
Typically, when the subject of the haiku is about the elderly, it usually means the season is either late fall or winter. But here, the image is of two old men sitting down at the end of the pier, coming here every day to tell stories, so I picture them talking under the warm spring sun.
The contrast between yesteryear and every day, for me, when I read, I love that contrast, and this I think works with Basho too, is that the ancients, the yesteryear, the inspiration of stories from yesteryear, and yet it's continuing in a contemporary vein and on towards the future.
It's a nice tie-in.
Yeah.
Let's look at the next one.
Under the weeping willow, a tiny grave, the shadow of my cat.
The photograph is very soothing. It's an image that Monet and other impressionists probably would have liked. But looking at the haiku, I think the first line, under the weeping willow, this entire sentence seems a bit too descriptive of the photo.
There are a couple of shadows, clearly. I mean, this is a natural scene, so there are shadows under there. But I think it's interesting the way grave and shadow work together, because I often think of shadow as being a kind of a ghost, a shade.
Well, you know, under weeping willow trees in Japanese anyway, you always find yurei, female ghosts who are hanging around. So I guess it has a ghostly connotation in other cultures as well.
Yes.
And it's weeping.
Right. Well, that's the other thing with the death and the tiny grave. It's such a small little life, but clearly the shadow is looming in this poet's.
I see someone walking through the scenery here, perhaps, and maybe actually stumbling across a tiny grave. Whether for her cat or not, I don't know. And I'm not sure that's important. And then you have, as a kireji, a very unusual choice of a Spanish tilde, which kind of made me think of a cat's tail.
Oh.
I think that there is a lot of love behind the words, a tiny grave. For example, I think the author could have left out the line about the willow tree and instead have written something like, a tiny grave, my frog's shadow. It would have thrown off the reader. A cat may be too straightforward and perhaps a bit too sad. There could have been ways to create a little more distance from the photograph. Let's see the next one.
Pearl choker, the sum of what life brings. Too late. It's
missed opportunities of missed memories that she has but are gone and she cannot pursue. What I really like, though, is with the text and the image, and this is what Basho worked with too, is the pearl choker. That's quite expensive. You know, I mean, if you're talking about actual pearls, that's a very expensive, almost aristocrat kind of image with a long neck and a choker. And then you look at the image, and it's gulls lined up on that line. So that high image of kisoku, of aristocracy, and then the very low image, and it's low in the water, and that the gulls just lined up there. I really like the breadth that encompasses between the text and the image.
Where does a pearl start? It starts from a single grain of sand. And then year after year after year, it builds up a luster. And our lives are like that too. We year after year after year pick up things that we learn and know and begin to understand. And sometimes it's too late. Sometimes we wish we could take back some words we said.
Because only now are we understanding.
Exactly.
The sum of life, what that means is that a person is preparing for their impending death. For example, if you are a person of wealth, you have to make preparations for inheritance, giving and leaving everything to your children. You are basically clearing and ridding yourself of your belongings. Basho did something similar by only taking what he absolutely needed on his journey. That was, in essence, the sum of life for him. He didn't want to leave anything behind. It was him preparing to disappear, to go back to nature where he first came from.
Matsuo Basho was a haiku poet of the 17th century. He created a haiku philosophy that is still relevant today. Basho traveled all over Japan on writing journeys which culminated with his final haiku travelogue, Okuno Hosomichi, known as the narrow road to the deep north. Basho's journey spanned over 150 days, walking over 2,400 kilometers throughout the sparsely populated northern area of Japan. For Basho, who was in his advanced years, the journey posed the possibility of death. But in search of new inspiration for his haiku, Basho left everything behind and embarked on his journey. His haiku travelogue includes 50 poems, which have for many come to define what haiku is. During his travels, Basho encountered the concept of fueki ryuko. The concept of fueki ryuko was conceived of in China. 2003 fueki means unchanging, and ryuko means to change with the times. The two words fueki exists because of ryuko, and thus creating an inseparable cycle which is connected at the core.
One of Basho's haiku that embodies the concept of fueki ryuko is,
Ah, summer grasses, the remains of great warriors' dreams. All you see is the summer grass, but this was a place where many warriors fought their battles, dreaming of a glorious future.
the summer grass is fueki, or the unchanging element, while the soldier's dreams are ryuko, or ever-changing elements. However, the summer grass grows and dies, and it once again is reborn. So it can also be seen as ryuko, and in the same vein, civilization can also be fueki, because history repeats itself. Basho thought of Fueki Ryuko as the underlying law of nature.
Well, certainly this idea of unchanging and ever-changing is not simply located in Japan. I mean, all over the world, we all have our ideas about, you know, the past, and perhaps with our own parents. And our own parents would like us to take this job or follow in this tradition or do what they did because they feel it's the safest, because it's the most approved way. But as young people, I think all over the world, we have to make decisions about, well, do we stay the safe course, which has been done years and years and years before, or do we take that chance and find something new and challenge ourselves and go out and make new discoveries? So this idea of working with the past and enlivening the future is part of the human condition.
Basho was the pioneer who incorporated this concept of Fueki Ryuko in his haiku, and that is why his haiku is still relevant today after 300 years. Lastly, in your opinion, what is it that you find appealing about Basho's haiku?
What he does is, for me at any rate, and I am not a Basho scholar, put that right out there, but in my appreciation for Basho, I do his compassion, I think. Compassion. The way he puts himself, he places himself there for you in such a sort of naked way. He cultivates that.
Here is a photo haiku by Michio Nakahara, inspired by the philosophy found in Basho's Okuno Hosomichi. Fall deepens. Come empty-handed, as they say. Thank you for your haiku submissions for the photo of the month. The photo of the month is a picture of steps in Tochigi Prefecture, surrounded by greenery.
Here is the first one.
Midlife. The road narrows onward and behind me.
In one word, I would say this photo haiku is about the realization of the remaining days in your life. You see the road turning to the left and disappearing. When you reach a certain age, it seems as though you can't see the end, but at the same time you feel that you can. There are parts that are under the shadows of the trees, while you see other areas where the sunlight comes through. They are like the days which middle-aged people experience, where you have a more stark contrast between the good and bad days. It expresses these sentiments quite well. Here is the second one.
Always on his way, between somewhere and nowhere, happy to be lost.
The word that comes to mind is expectation or renewed expectation. Opposite to the previous haiku, this is a person with no regard to the remaining days of his life. He doesn't know exactly where he stands. He can go up the steps or not. He is full of renewed expectation, waiting for what comes ahead.
Night stroll in the fields. I lie down on a large rock, still warm from the day. blonde curls glowing in the sunlight, beauty even in death. Only the rope still knows about the dreams of the boat. We are looking for haiku masters from around the world. Please submit your photo haiku through our website.
Here is the next one.
Gull drifts beyond the hill. Summer deepens.
When you see the colors of this photograph and you read the words "summer deepens," it is quite moving. There is no gull drifting in this photograph, so in terms of our guideline, fusoku furi, not too close, not too far, I think that the haiku adds a new element to the photo.
Perfect.
It is quite good.
I think it's remarkable that these simple words can convey so much depth, so much emotion, because I don't like it when summer leaves. I like the heat, I like the warmth.
A gull drifts, stop at a break there, or a gull drifts beyond the hill break. And the different, yeah, so if a gull drifts, and then beyond the hill, summer deepens. So summer is deepening in the background. In the depths, summer is deepening. Or a gull drifts beyond the hill, ... break, summer deepens, would be the gull is drifting beyond the hill, and summer is in the foreground.
Do you think it's necessary to decide in this case where you have two possible kireji? Isn't it okay to leave it so that there's a swing in there where it could be either way?
Oh,
I
absolutely.
rather like that, actually.
Yeah.
In a Japanese haiku, which follows the 5-7-5 moire format, there are often situations where the first 5 moire and the last 5 moire each pull at the middle 7 moire. In this photo haiku, with regard to the line "beyond the hill," depending upon how you read it, what is beyond the hill may be the gull or summer. So the reader can decide what kind of scenery lies beyond the hill. It is quite interesting. Let's look at the next one.
Perfect flower. Even the old wall sniffs the air.
This made me laugh when I read this. The animation of the wall, even the old wall, it's not just a wall, but it's an old wall, and you can see that from the brick and the concrete over time, sniffs, and I just, this sniff of the rose, I think it's a rose, I'm not sure.
I think it's a camellia.
It's camellia.
Yeah, it looks like a camellia.
But the scent even makes the wall curious. And the image of sniffing, it's almost a double image, because there's a sort of I want to, it's interesting, but then there's also a sort of, can't handle that, sort of. So there's a funny kind of play that I appreciated.
Poem plays around a little bit because it says perfect flower, and they're not actually perfect. These are kind of slightly wind-battered and bug-eaten camellias. And another interesting thing is the wall is not that old. This wall seems actually a kind wall, though, unlike the one that usually divides people. This one seems to be supporting the flower in some way. sounded to me like a poem of an old couple. And the wall has to say, oh yes, you're a perfect flower, you are just my beauty, I will protect you every day. Yes, you smell great too. So there's a certain amount of comedy in it. And then there's also personification, which is very odd in a haiku. It usually doesn't appear in classical ones at all.
Basho is often talked about in terms of animating nature, but that's very different from personification, right? And it's a quite different.
When people just begin to write haiku, oftentimes it is easier for them to personify things through their own eyes. But Basho's philosophy was that every living creature or plant on this planet had a soul, and that is why the winds whisper, and the stars gaze, and the sun smiles upon us. When writing haiku from that perspective, it is something that is completely different from personification.
The haiku masters will now select the haiku master of the month. Gull drifts beyond the hill. Summer deepens.
It has a very powerful, fantasy-like silhouette. It truly features the strength of a person in his struggle to live. That is why I chose this photo haiku.
I think it's great to see how such short words, really simple words, can take us to a much deeper and more interesting place. And I think the photograph is marvelous as well. It's totally very, very satisfying combination.
So what are your thoughts after spending the day with us today?
I think this is a wonderful opportunity to see haiku in action. To take these photographs, and the fact that they're from abroad and there's so many different scenes and so many different ways of looking and thinking, and yet they all come together in haiku. I think that's the breadth and the power of haiku. I'm not sure you could do this with any other poetic genre. With the level, the brevity, the immensity and the brevity and the depth and the visual and the text. It's quite wonderful.